I sat in that mahogany-paneled office, the smell of expensive leather and stale coffee filling my lungs, and watched my entire future dissolve into a single sheet of paper. The loan officer, a man named Miller with a pitying look in his eyes, didn't even look at me. He just tapped his pen on the document, a red-stamped denial for my first home loan. "Meredith," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I don't know how to tell you this, but your debt-to-income ratio is astronomical. You've defaulted on 3 high-interest personal loans in the last 18 months. Your credit score is sitting at a 420. My heart didn't just drop. It stopped. I had worked 3 jobs since I was 22. I lived in a studio apartment that smelled like damp drywall. I drove a 2012 sedan with a screeching fan belt. All of it, every grueling shift, every skipped meal was to pay off my 6-figure student debt. I was the responsible one. I was the success story. "I don't have any personal loans," I whispered, my hands trembling as I reached for the folder. He pushed the papers toward me. My name was there, typed in bold, black ink. But the signatures, they were a shaky, stylized version of my handwriting, close but not quite mine. The addresses linked to the accounts weren't my cramped studio. They were for a gated community in the hills. My parents' house. I walked out of that bank into the blinding Virginia sun, the world spinning. My parents, Arthur and Evelyn, lived like royalty. My father was a consultant whose business had been restructuring for a decade, yet he wore $3,000 suits. My mother hosted weekly gala luncheons for the local elite, dripping in pearls and talking about their legacy. I had always wondered how they maintained that lifestyle while I struggled. I thought they were just better at the game than I was. I thought their wealth was the result of decades of prestige. I never imagined that their prestige was being financed by my identity. I didn't call them. I didn't scream. Instead, I drove to their house. I found them on the veranda, sipping expensive Chardonnay while a caterer prepped for their upcoming anniversary masquerade. "Meredith, darling," my mother chirped, not even looking up from her seating chart. "You look exhausted. You really should invest in a better skin routine. It's a matter of self-respect." "I was at the bank today," I said, my voice as cold as the ice in her glass. "My loan for the townhouse was denied." "Do you know why, Dad?" My father didn't flinch. He just swirled his wine, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "The economy is tough, Meredith. We told you a townhouse was a reach for someone in your position." "It wasn't the economy," I snapped, throwing the copies of the defaulted loans onto the table, right over my mother's hand-calligraphed invitations. "It was the $80,000 in loans taken out in my name, using my social security number, sent to this address." The silence that followed was heavy. My mother finally looked up, but there was no guilt. There was only a sharp, icy annoyance. "We needed a bridge loan, Meredith," she said, as if she were explaining a grocery list. "The social club dues were behind, and your father's firm had a temporary cash flow issue. We're your parents. We gave you life. Surely your credit is a small price to pay for our family's standing in this community." "You stole my life," I whispered. My father stood up then, towering over me with that practiced, patriarchal authority. "Don't be dramatic. You're our daughter. You wouldn't dream of making a scene. What would people say? That the prestigious Andersons are common thieves? No, you'll just have to work a little harder to clean this up. Consider it a lesson in family loyalty." He patted my shoulder, the same hand that had signed my ruin, and walked back inside to check on the catering. They weren't afraid. They were certain I was a liability they could control. They thought I was a good girl. They forgot that a good girl is exactly who knows where all the bodies are buried. I drove away from that sprawling estate, my father's lesson in family loyalty ringing in my ears like a death knell. They truly believed I was an asset to be liquidated, a line of credit they could tap into whenever the champagne ran low. They sat in that house, surrounded by stolen luxury, convinced that my love for them was a blindfold. But as I pulled my battered sedan into the parking lot of a 24-hour library, I felt a strange, cold clarity. The Meredith who cried over late bills was gone. In her place was a woman who realized that if my parents wanted to treat our relationship like a business transaction, I was going to make sure they went bankrupt. I spent the next 6 hours submerged in the digital paper trail. Since I was the primary borrower on these fraudulent loans, I had every legal right to access the account portals. My hands didn't shake anymore. I was a ghost in their machine. I logged into the portal for Summit Crest Holdings, the firm that held the largest defaulted loan. I looked at the scanned application. There it was, my social security number, my date of birth, and an email address I didn't recognize. AndersonEstate@gmail.com. I tried a few passwords. My mother's birthday? No. Their wedding anniversary? No. Then I tried Legacy2024. The inbox bloomed open. It wasn't just 3 loans. It was a systematic harvest. They had been using my identity for years to shuffle debt. When one credit card reached its limit, they opened another in my name to pay the minimum balance on the first. They had used my good girl reputation, the fact that I had never missed a payment on my actual student loans, to build a house of cards that was now crushing me. I found spreadsheets. My father, the consultant, had actually kept a ledger of the fraud. He titled the folder Family Maintenance. In his mind, ruining my credit was just an operational expense for his social standing. I saw charges for a $5,000 Dior gown for my mother, a membership renewal at the yacht club, and the final twist of the knife, the down payment on the very Mercedes my father was driving. He was driving my future while I was taking the bus to my 3rd job. I didn't call a lawyer yet. Instead, I called the credit bureaus. I initiated a total freeze on my credit. I watched the denied notifications start to ping in that hijacked email inbox in real time. My parents were currently trying to open a new line of credit for their masquerade ball. Access denied. Identity verification required. I could almost hear the frustration echoing from their veranda. Then I did the one thing they were certain I would never do. I didn't go to them to beg for a resolution. I went to the Federal Trade Commission website. I began filling out the identity theft affidavit. In the eyes of the law, there are no parents or children when it comes to a 1099-C or a fraudulent signature. There are only victims and perpetrators. I attached the PDFs of the ledger I found. I attached the IP addresses from the logins at their house. I wrote a clear, emotionless statement. I wasn't a daughter reporting her parents. I was a citizen reporting a crime. As I hit submit, a prompt appeared on the screen. By clicking confirm, you understand that this may lead to criminal prosecution of the individuals involved. I thought of my mother's comment about my skin routine. I thought of my father's hand on my shoulder as he told me to work harder. I clicked confirm. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the system to do what it does best, collect. The confirmation email hit my inbox like a silent gavel. The Federal Trade Commission, FTC, doesn't care about family loyalty. They care about the integrity of the banking system. By filing that identity theft affidavit, I hadn't just reported a crime. I had effectively handed a master key to the debt collectors. The beauty of the American financial system is its ruthlessness once the word fraud is officially stamped on a file. Within 48 hours, the automated machinery began to grind. The first sign of the collapse came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my 2nd job, tutoring a high school senior in calculus, when my phone began to vibrate incessantly. It was my mother. I ignored the first 6 calls. On the 7th, I answered. "Meredith, what have you done?" Her voice was shrill, stripped of its usual melodic condescension. The Amex, my platinum card, it was declined at the florist. In front of the entire charity committee, they said there's a fraud block on the whole account. "That's strange, Mom," I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. "Maybe you should check your credit report. I hear identity theft is a real problem these days. Don't you dare be flippant with me, your father is livid." Some investigator from Summit Crest called the house asking for Meredith Anderson. He told them you'd filed a police report. "Call them back right now and tell them it was a mistake. Tell them we had your permission." "I can't do that, Mom," I replied, leaning back in my chair, "because that would be perjury. And unlike you, I actually value my freedom." "You're going to ruin us," she screamed. "The masquerade is in 3 days. We've already committed to the catering. If the accounts are frozen, we can't pay the deposit." "Then I guess the masks are coming off a little early," I said and hung up. An hour later, my father's black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot of the tutoring center. He didn't come inside. He waited by my car, his face a mask of controlled fury. As I walked out, he stepped into my path, his hand reaching out to grab my arm, the same patriarchal move he'd used on the veranda. I stepped back, holding up my phone. The camera app was open, the record button glowing red. "Don't," I said. "Every word you say is being recorded for my legal counsel. If you touch me, I'm adding assault to the identity theft affidavit." He froze. The realization finally flickered in his eyes. The good girl was gone. He was looking at a creditor. "Meredith," he started, his voice dropping to a low, threatening rumble. "You think you're smart? You've just signed your own inheritance away. You think the banks will just forgive you. They'll come for us, and when we're gone, you'll have nothing. No family, no home to come back to." "I haven't had a home since you started using my social security number as an ATM, Dad," I countered. "And as for the inheritance, you've already spent it. You spent it on that car, those suits, and Mom's pearls. You didn't borrow from the bank, you stole from my future. Now the bank wants its car back." I pointed to his Mercedes. "I checked the VIN on the Summit Crest loan. That car is collateral for the $80,000 loan I just contested. Since I didn't sign for it, the bank is rescinding the financing. I'd start looking for a bus pass if I were you." He looked at the car, then back at me, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. For the first time in my life, I saw the king look small. The morning of the anniversary masquerade arrived with a deceptive stillness. My parents had spent 40 years perfecting the art of the front, and they weren't about to let a federal investigation ruin their finest performance. They had scrambled together enough cash, likely from selling my mother's heirloom jewelry, to ensure the gala went ahead. They thought if they could just keep up appearances for one more night, they could manipulate me into withdrawing the charges. They were wrong. The gears of the IRS and the banking fraud units don't stop for a party. I didn't attend as a guest. I parked my old, loud sedan at the edge of the estate, hidden by the manicured hedges. I watched through the wrought iron gates as the local elite arrived. Men in tuxedos and women in ornate masks, all coming to pay tribute to the prestigious Andersons. Around 9 p.m., the music was at its peak. I could see my father on the balcony, a glass of vintage scotch in his hand, laughing with a local judge. My mother was center stage, draped in a silk gown that probably cost 3 months of my rent. She looked radiant. She looked untouchable. Then the first strobe of blue and red light hit the white stone of the driveway. It wasn't a SWAT team. It was something much more terrifying to people like my parents. The sheriff's department and 2 plainclothes agents from the financial crimes unit. Accompanying them was a flatbed tow truck from the repo company. The music didn't stop at first, but the guests did. They crowded the windows as the sheriff walked up the front steps. My father met them at the door, his mask pushed up onto his forehead, his face twisted in a mask of indignant rage. "This is a private residence?" I heard him roar, his voice carrying across the lawn. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Anderson," the officer replied, loud enough for the guests in the foyer to hear. "We're here regarding the Summit Crest Holdings collateral. And these gentlemen," he gestured to the plainclothes agents, "have a warrant to seize all financial records and electronic devices associated with the identity theft affidavit filed by Meredith Anderson." The silence that followed was absolute. The word theft rippled through the crowd like a virus. I saw my mother's socialite friends, the ones who whispered about my shabby clothes, pull back as if she were suddenly contagious. The tow truck driver didn't wait for an invitation. He backed up to my father's black Mercedes, the hooks clattering against the pavement. The screech of the car being dragged onto the bed of the truck was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a debt being repaid. My mother tried to retreat inside, but an agent stepped into the doorway. "Ma'am, we need the laptop and the ledger from the study. Now." "Meredith!" My mother screamed into the night, looking wildly around the lawn, hoping I was there to save her from the embarrassment. Meredith, tell them it's a family matter. I stayed in the shadows. I didn't need to say a word. The system I had spent my life fearing was finally working for me. As the guests began to shuffle out, looking at their shoes to avoid eye contact with the thieves they had just been toasting, I saw my father collapse into a chair on the veranda. He looked old. He looked hollow. The king had been evicted from his throne, and the crown was being taken as evidence. The aftermath was quieter than the explosion, but it was far more satisfying. For weeks, the local papers and society blogs were obsessed with the Anderson scandal. The success story was revealed to be a house of cards built on the stolen future of their only child. In the eyes of the law, the process was clinical. Because I had filed the FTC identity theft affidavit and a formal police report, the burden of proof shifted. The banks couldn't legally hold me responsible for contracts I never signed. One by one, the defaulted marks on my credit report vanished, replaced by a beautiful, sterile, closed, fraudulent account. My credit score didn't just recover, it soared. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't drowning. 3 months later, I sat in a much smaller, sun-drenched office. No mahogany, just clean white desks and the smell of fresh paint. The same loan officer, Mr. Miller, handed me a pen. This time, his smile was genuine. "Everything is in order, Meredith," he said. "The townhouse is yours, clear title, fair interest, and most importantly, no baggage." As I signed my name, my real signature, my phone buzzed. It was a collect call from a local facility. My father. He had been hit with federal wire fraud charges, and while my mother was out on bail, their assets had been frozen to settle the restitution. They were living in a cramped 2-bedroom rental, the kind of place they used to mock. I accepted the call. "Meredith," his voice was stripped of its thunder. He sounded like a man who had finally realized the world didn't owe him a living. "The lawyers say if you sign a letter of leniency, if you tell the court we were managing your finances, the charges could be dropped. We're your parents, Meredith, you're destroying us." "No, Dad," I said, looking at the keys to my new home. "I'm just finishing the lesson you started. You told me to consider this a lesson in family loyalty. Well, I learned it. My loyalty is to the person who actually worked for this life, me." "We have nothing left," he hissed. "They took the cars, the house, the memberships. We're ruined." "You aren't ruined," I replied calmly. "You're just finally living within your means. It's a bit of a reach for someone in your position, but I'm sure you'll work a little harder to clean it up." "Isn't that what you told me?" I didn't wait for his answer. I hung up and blocked the number. I walked out of the bank and drove to my new home. It wasn't a mansion in the hills. It didn't have a veranda or a wine cellar. But as I turned the key in the lock, I knew one thing for certain. Every brick, every tile, and every square inch of that floor belonged to me. I wasn't a line of credit anymore. I was Meredith Anderson, and for the first time in my life, I was debt-free. The anatomy of a betrayal is complex, but the anatomy of revenge is simple. You don't have to get your hands dirty if you let the truth do the work for you.